Okay, so for the botany we have to go right back to 1867. And it should be said that the artist formerly known as Carterii, see what I did there, grows across Somalia and up into Yemen. But in 1867, a book published by the Austrian author Friedrich August Flückiger, the book was called Lehrbuch der Pharmacognosy des Pflanzenreiches, details of the species Boswellia sacra. But then in 1870, George Birdwood, who was a British botanist and surgeon, went to Somalia and he said, wait a minute, no, this species I see here looks nothing like what's in that book. It must be a new species. He argued different leaves, different growth form, different flowers, got to be different. And so he decided he was going to name his new species after what was presumably somebody who had really inspired him. H.J. Carter, Henry John Carter, had been a worker for the East India Tea Company who had collected species extensively from Somalia and from Arabia. And so he said, right, I'm going to name this species after Carter. This is Boswellia Carterii. And from that moment, it became known that Boswellia sacra was the name of the Arabian incense, or incense that came from the Arabian Peninsula. And if it was African, then we would say Boswellia Carterii. And it stayed that way for around about 150 years until GCMS reports became advanced enough to reveal something very odd about the essential oil of Boswellia Carterii. And that was that there was a chemical in there that shouldn't be there. Not only should it not be there for this particular frankincense, but actually it shouldn't be there for plants, because methoxydecane and methoxyoctane had only ever, as I understand it, been seen relating to millipedes, moulds or spider silks. So why was this in the GCMS report? So to begin with, I think that there was the argument then, well, in that case, this is adulterated and maybe there was some kind of foul play at hand. But then verification, really, that Birdwood must have been right, because if this made a different chemical to the Arabian one, then they must have been different species, right? But then a third version, a third idea came through, and that was, what if we're seeing a new chemotype? And in 2016 a paper was written, released by doctors Prabodh Satyal and Robert Papas, who put forward the idea that there must be a new chemotype. And the paper was called Biological Activity of a Novel Boswellia Chemotype, the Methoxyalkane Frankincense. I didn't read that, honestly. And so this was put forward. Maybe there is a new kind of frankincense. How bloody exciting. Okay, so the search is on to find this new species, if it exists. And so to do that, need feet on the ground in Somalia. And so enter in two new people, Doctors Anjanette DiCarlo and Dr. Stephen Johnson. Stephen Johnson is an expert in supply chain, and DiCarlo has a doctorate from the University of Vermont in natural resources and environment. And DiCarlo had heard harvesters talking about two different trees. Now, we have to get interested in the naming, because they referred to Boswellia Carterii by several different names, sometimes Mohor Cad, sometimes Mohor Lab, but they also discerned another Mohor tree, which they called Bio or Mohor Maddo. And Mohor Maddo seemed different, and the harvesters kind of recognised that it was different, but they were putting all of the resins into the same sack together. So it became clear that perhaps this was the issue, and they needed to work out, well, which resin comes from which tree. And they spent a lot of time really isolating what resin came from where, and then they sent species samples to a gentleman called Dr. Matt Sterling, who was from the University of Uppsala, whose specialist area as a botanist was how lineages of plants spread across the world. And he looked really closely at them and he said, you're right, there is something different here. There is a new species we've never seen, a hidden species called Boswellia occulta. And this is the tree that the harvesters were calling Bio or Moho Mado. But when he took that out, he said, but also there's something else. What I can see then is what is Boswellia Carterii actually isn't different to what Flückiger explained way back in 1867. They're the same species. Birdwood was right in that they look different. They do have leaves that are different. They do have flowers that are different. They have a different growth structure, but the way that one sort of hangs off the side of a cliffside in Somalia and how one grows in a wadi in Oman, or the other way around, is related to just its reaction to the environment. They are the same species. And under the sort of taxonomical laws of naming, you should only go with the earliest name. So therefore, under superfluous naming, they did not need a new name of Boswellia Carterii, hence why they say we should say Boswellia Sacra Flückiger. So we have two things to know here. First of all, that there is no such thing as a Carterii tree. It should never have been named that way. It was always a Sacra tree. But also that there is another new species called Occulta. And Occulta is why we were having this reading on GCMS reports of methoxydecane and methoxyoctane. So quite exciting, a new kind of frankincense that we didn't know about, which I'm not going to go into in depth here because it's a whole different thing, but does have traditional uses of its own that just had never been recorded. So this is why we're told, right, you should change the name to Sacra. There's never been a tree called Boswellia Carterii. It's Boswellia Sacra. My argument is partly, and we'll address the other part in a minute, that, yeah, but there's two oils in there. We know that. That's how it came about. It's not Sacra. It's Sacra and Occulta. Okay? So this is why I'm saying that it's a zebra, because there's a black one and a white one in there. That's exactly what the harvesters were doing. They were throwing black ones and white ones. So that's the first part of my argument. But also, what I'm going to address in the next part is the terroir that Thulin was saying, well, it doesn't make any difference. That's just how it's grown differently because of the terroir when it's distilled. And when we look at the secondary metabolites and how those change into essential oils, then those secondary metabolites exhibit themselves really differently. They become mirror versions of each other. And since the body can only process one version, not the middle version, they have really different properties. So that's the next part.